Generally high levels of aggression among Perth men. Recently moved back to Perth after 20 years away. In my 40s now. Living in Mosman Park, and I've noticed a lot of extremely aggressive men. I'm polite and speak calmly, but am not small or timid. One time a guy roughly my age sped past me while I was crossing a quiet street, and a few minutes later pulled up in front of me at a supermarket. I said, "You were going about 80 kilometers back there." He was absolutely outraged and ran towards me swinging and swearing. I dodged the swings and backed up, but he was furious. Another guy had a loud dog that barked all day, and I politely asked if he could try and reduce the barking, and again he was totally outraged, and I sensed there was a threat of physical violence. Is this normal? Is there something I'm missing? Noticed other more subtle things like tradies laughing if I wore open shoes, slightly baggier pants. Anything even slightly out of the ordinary seems to elicit anger in men. Does anyone have a take on this? Thanks. It's definitely ramped up over the last 20 years. There's a sense of don't get in my way, don't question me, I can do whatever I want. You see elements of it right here in this sub. 1. Meth. Drug testing on the mines means that people use meth, as it's out of their systems fast enough to pass the drug test. 2. Anxiety, fear of joblessness, homelessness, and actual joblessness, and homelessness. People are worried. Leads to lots of edgy, angry men. I've seen a lot more aggression on the roads recently as well. Women are more upset too, they just tend to be less openly aggro. Although I've seen a few more altercations with women in customer service situations recently. The high number of cheap apartments in Mosman Park has always been associated with high levels of recreational drug use. What has changed in the last 20 years is the type of drugs being used. Heroin, cannabis, MDMA have been pushed out by meth, which is cheap, accessible, highly addictive, and overuse causes aggressive manic behavior. Noticed other more subtle things like tradies laughing if I wore open shoes, slightly baggier pants. Meanwhile those same tradies get around with a skullet mullet haircut wearing slippers and socks, with what looks like their mum's sunnies from 1973. Go figure. A lot of people in the comments are excusing the kind of behavior that OP is talking about with cost of living, employment anxiety, and the housing market. Just let me say, there is absolutely no excuse for aggressive behavior in society. I've lived here for all but 3 years of my life, and I can say it's really nothing new. I've experienced this type of aggression from men in Perth since I was a teen in the 90s, however it's definitely become worse over time. Too many factors to count really, but yeah, wouldn't surprise me if it's risen, from mental health, to living costs, to living situations, to deaths of people close to them. From personal experience, I've seen a few guys around me lost a lot of people in the last couple years to general city life and increased population. Most people that seem to be more aggressive are middle-aged, and have probably seen huge increases to population and community density, poor work-life balance, minimal available support systems or ones that are affordable. The list goes on. I lived in Perth in the 90s, and there were a lot of aggressive fuckwits then. Not sure if it's a recent thing. Say that to my face. Where did you live while away? I've been living in Canada for the last 12 years and definitely get less psychos than in the US, especially on the roads. Australians are more aggressive and more inclined to fight like cavemen, but then they're also more direct and less passive-aggressive, which I prefer. Sounds about right for a Perth. It is almost impossible for two blokes to have a disagreement that doesn't degenerate into a shouting match, and then an offer and acceptance to a physical altercation. We seriously do not know how to have a verbal dispute that is conducted in a civil matter, and ultimately resolves the matter. Most view it as a challenge to their manhood, and we must now throw fists like the Wild West in the 1800s. Grew up in Sydney and moved to Perth in early 2000s. I remember being struck by how all the blokes just wore black, didn't hit the dance floor, and were generally going to great pains to appear macho. I felt like it was a mining town thing. I've just spent the last 3.5 in the UK, Europe, USA. The only place that I saw aggression was the US. I never noticed it anywhere else. When we landed back in Australia, I noticed the aggression nearly straight away. Agree. I feel like high of pop is on meth or some sort of stimulant. Edit to add OP makes post about overly aggressive people. Gets majority of overly aggressive comments face with tears of joy. I know what you mean and experienced it when I returned from a long spell overseas. I often have a guess about the cause, but in the end just moved to a more remote part of W.A where it is like Perth 20 years ago. I have no real plan for 20 years' time when it hits here. If the dating pool is anything to go by, I hear truly awful things from my friends and genuinely worry about them in relationships. If you can feel the aggression in the street, imagine what's happening behind closed doors. Some of the most controlling, aggressive and terrifying texts I've ever seen were from men who claim to love their partner. It's bringing out the worst in women too. Everyone seems scared and easy to trigger. Add to that, the devastating stats on men's suicide. Something is really wrong here. It's definitely because of meth. So much meth. It's cooked people's brains. Drugs. Lots and lots of drug use. Things are becoming more hopeless, and hopelessness breeds all types of horrible behavior. Unless something fixes the social contract, you can expect this to get worse. Suicides too. I work other mines, and there is a very popular thing to do now for guys to be on steroids, specifically if you work underground. I've had this experience any time I've called a man out for anything in public, mostly in Melbourne. I have noticed that drivers here are really aggressive. If you beep when they literally endanger your life on the road, they give the finger. Had it happen a few times. Only the men get that angry that they yell in their car and give the finger. It's so odd how angry some people are. It's just the internet materializing in the streets. Not just the men, but the women and the children too. My God, all these stories make Perth sound legit worse than Darwin, and that should be embarrassing. It's not just Perth, exactly the same in NSW. Tough times in the Mosman Park, lad. Gear, gear and more gear. Drugs, alcohol, mental illness. Toxic masculinity is also fragile masculinity. Aggression is an overcompensation for feelings of inadequacy. Meth is your answer. Meth and roids. Increased pressures of the cost of living? Some Perth males are infected by the rage virus from 28 days later. Yes. Moved away 12 years ago to a more polite country that tend to say sorry too often. But yeah, whenever I visit Perth I have to agree that there is still that bravado don't tread on me vibe going on. Social media seems to have spread angry man disease. Mate, there are 2 million people in Perth, so roughly 1 million men. I don't think your handful of unfortunate experiences are representative of the entire male population of the city. Shitty yes, but not the norm. Are the angry laughter of tradies. Add meth into the mix. Tradies wear skin-tight jeans to show off their assets to the boss. Was riding on the footpath and had a guy just jump on the path in front of me. Casually mentioned, mate, be mindful of your surroundings, and as met with an aggressive I've got right of way. Sometimes you just have to walk away with the added comfort of having a front-facing camera. I said you were going about 80 kilometers back there. IMO, don't poke the bear. I'd rather let the police catch up with them, rather than risk getting a punch in the face. Your choice though. Lived in a developing country for a decade, saw some aggression, but upon coming back to Perth I'd say I saw the same amount of aggression in Perth in the span of a few months, as I did in that developing country over the span of 10 years. For example, when I went to Carousel upon returning, I saw a married couple with kids arguing loudly in public. And when I went to the Perth City Library, I saw 2 people fighting in public near the entrance. I think there's a few things at play. There's a current mindset shift in society that is challenging the patriarchal norms of the past. It's the old saying, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality and equity feels like oppression. Mix that in with an increasing sense of entitlement, means blokes simply don't know how to take a loss. Basically it's an insecurity issue that produces a fight or flight response.